New Jersey actually just passed some of the most restrictive e-bike legislation in the country, and it's kind of thrown the whole system into chaos. So e-bikes and e-bike lash will be the focus May 21st for our next event series. So for those of you who are new to Reconnect's work, we're glad to see you. We wanted to have more of these kinds of community conversations this year to kind of bring more people in to the conversation. And we advocate for transportation options that enable a more vibrant and equitable community, whether by bus, by bike, by rail, or on foot. And we really aspire to influence and shape the decisions that impact how everyday Monroe County residents get around. And there's a lot more ways that you all can get involved in the efforts that we're involved in, and hopefully tonight's content will inspire you from Carter. I'm going to stop sharing so you can actually see us here in the room, and we'll give you some tools. Start to give you some tools on how you can be effective transportation advocates. Terry said road scholar. I like that. You want to become a road scholar for road advocacy. So we're really excited to have Carter here, and if he can indulge me another minute or two, I just wanted to share some exciting news on our side. Is that on our website we have launched an advocate toolkit. This is kind of our attempt at sharing all the best knowledge and information about transportation and road project advocacy specifically. We try to give people the talking points when there's a road project that's coming up, but we really want to empower more people to be able to speak to these issues of street safety and how to engineer our roads differently, so that we can pull the United States out of the massive road violence crisis that we have here. And your voice, the residents really power the movement. So, your voice can matter, make a difference in the fight. I think a really good example of that, just today we learned that there's been a pullback from trying to roll out autonomous vehicles in the state of New York from the governor. And there was a lot of advocacy from Reconnect Rochester audience and also statewide, kind of saying like we're not against AVs, but we are at least saying if you're going to do this with much more caution than they have done. And I think that really worked to slow down the process. So it's something we can be proud of. But yeah, use the toolkit. Definitely get it out there to other people who you might know who might want to learn more about it. And it's a living toolkit, so everything we do, we learn. We're not perfect. We don't know we don't know what's effective or not effective. So, this week's been a great example of a week in transportation advocacy. Yesterday, we were kind of getting like a lot of heat and pushback from the governor's office on one thing, and then today we actually hosted the DMV commissioner on a different thing. So, some days are good and some days are bad, and some days you're effective and some days you're humbled and you learn. And so it's a really fun journey in this transportation advocacy world sometimes. Let me now introduce Carter, and for those of us in the room, I'm going to put you up on the big screen, Carter. Now you look like Max Headroom, the giant face. If anyone gets that old reference. Okay, there's two people in the waiting room. Right. It's Jesse and Mary, so that's good.
Great.
I just want to say we're honored to have you, Carter. And if you don't mind, I'll do a quick bio. Carter's an activist, trainer, and strategist in the world of transportation and climate advocacy. He helps organizations and individuals hone strategy and build power. He's based in Oakland, California, and he's the co-founder of transportation advocacy group Trans-Bay Coalition and a board game design company called Serious Mischief. I love that. So tonight, Carter will be presenting on his 2025 book, If You Want to Win, You've Got to Fight, a guide to effective transportation advocacy, published by Island Press. If you haven't already picked up a copy of the book, we have several copies for sale in the back. And so with that, I'll hand it over to you, sir.
Great. Thank you so much. And just want to do a quick audio check before I launch into the whole thing. Can you hear me?
We can hear you
And
in the room. Okay.
great. Again, nods from the Zoomers. Well, first off, thank you all so much. Team over there, Reconnect Rochester. It's great to be here with you and great to chat with you all. As it says, my name's Carter Lavin. In the Bay Area, I lead this group, Trans Bay Coalition. We are advocates across a 9 county region, millions of people, 27 different transit agencies, everything from high-speed rail to ferries to bus shelters to rogue people building their own benches at bus stops. And for the last several years, I've been training activists because a big thing that I've seen in my career is whether you are trying to get a bus stop installed or trying to get a bus lane or a bike lane or a crosswalk or any of these sorts of things, a lot of the skills that you use, a lot of the skills that you cultivate, a lot of the strategies tend to be pretty similar. Every campaign is unique, every community is unique, every moment's unique, but there's a lot of similarities in how these things type of flow, and there's some kind of fundamentals that are common throughout. And so I wrote this book in part to help people have an easier time winning. As part of it, I recognize I am not a perfect advocate. I have not done everything in the world. I've done a lot of campaigns. I haven't done infinite amount. And so I made sure to interview advocates across the country in big states and small states and rural communities, in red states and blue states, in purple states, in small towns, in rural areas, in big cities, in small neighborhoods of big cities, kind of all this type of stuff, and say to them, really, like, what's working for you? What didn't work? What did you try? What have you learned? What did you wish you knew earlier? And then synthesize this into a book, which is 200 something pages, pretty short read. The climate activist Bill McKibben was a big supporter of it. And the book is structured to help folks absorb this. And it's for people who've been doing it, maybe some of you have been doing it for many years. And it's for some folks, they're new to this. And this is to help introduce it because uh, advocacy tends not to be something we learn in school. It tends not to be something we learn kind of systemically. It is something people tend to learn experientially, kind of chaotically. Any toddler who's ever asked one parent for a thing, been told no, and then asked another parent for the same thing and been told yes, has like figured out how to work the system. Like that is a toddler who's like, cool, I now know how to power math. So there's a lot of the stuff that's kind of around and we like can intuit a lot, but it felt very important that we systematize this, make this a lot easier. And so chapter one of the book in the intro, just to walk people through the flow, chapter one focuses on the fact that everyone in this room, both Zoom and physical, you're political agitators, you are change makers. And in fact, statistically speaking, in America, if you want your community to be one where the majority of people can walk, bike, or take a bus or train even wherever they need to get to, maybe even take a high-speed rail to get to other places. If you would like your community to be a community like that, statistically speaking, you are a radical. You want your community to be radically different than what it is. And maybe you say, yeah, I want that a gradual time period. It's like, yeah, your sole goal is a radical difference. That's not saying good or bad. That does say, given that that is the type of thing, you do kind of need to approach your advocacy differently. Like we are all swimming upstream. Um, that being said, given what our reality is, that 40,000 people are killed each year on our streets through traffic violence, it is good to want to radically depart from that. And so, chapter one focuses on helping, kind of our team, our folks, get more comfortable with politics because I understand that politics today doesn't sound like the most fun thing in the world for folks. Doesn't seem like a real chill, easy way to spend your time. But if you want a speed bump, you literally want to impact the lives of those around you. Like that's literally what a speed bump does. And that's a political act. So step one is like getting comfortable with politics, because it's hard to win something if you are not intentionally focusing on it. However, we're also all operating, there's a lot of things to one. So chapter two focuses on how to articulate that a bit better, how to navigate your community in the sense of, okay, what can your mayor get you and what could a city council member get you? How do I get my mayor to say to get the council member to do the thing? What's the county supervisor doing? Who's running the buses and what's with that? So chapter two helps map out. It's a little bit of that Schoolhouse Rock three ring circus of government. Like here's how this kind of works as it relates to transportation, and then specifically as it relates to types of fights, because some people are more comfortable doing like what I call like the culture fight of saying, look, I don't want to talk to a mayor ever. What I want to do is get a bunch of kids on the bikes and have a nice thing. It's like, great, that's a way of shifting the culture. Here's how that plays into all of this stuff. Here's how shifting the culture can help you eventually shift the budget. If you say, hey, look at, I have this great example from Megan Ramey up in a rural place of Oregon, who, as she self-described, I was the crazy bike lady in town, her words. And she was like, and no one listened to me. And then I started getting a bunch of kids biking to school as part of a like early pandemic era, let's hang out outside thing. And now it wasn't about saying yes to Megan when Megan saying I would like money for bike lanes in my community. It was about saying yes to all those cute little kids biking already. And so by, shifting the culture and then applying that to politics, to the policy world or the budget world, you can win. So chapter two focuses on how to articulate these visions that we all have, these goals, a bit more into like kind of separatable, like, okay, I want this from this elected official, I want this from that local business owner, and how to combine that together. Chapter three really delves into now that you have a stronger sense of what you want, who you want it from, how to contextualize it. At the end of the day, just because I could see names on this Zoom, like, Jenny, you and Andreas are different people. This might not come as a huge shock. You know that you're different people. That means that as you approach things, it's going to be different in this, that we all operate in different contexts, that Rochester is a different place than Syracuse. And so understanding how to run your campaign locally and like what to be looking for is such a key part. And so chapter three walks people through how to understand their context, how to navigate that, how to use that to make connections. So, and that works on both like a policy strategic way of saying, okay, the mayor of Rochester is blank, and this is what's going on, and this is how ensconced they are in their power, which is different than, what's happening to the mayor of Rome, New York, for example. Like, okay, how am I running this campaign here? And oh, if I'm now doing something at the county level, how do I recontextualize this? And then I also talk a bit about on the interpersonal level. So, for example, hard to see me on a Zoom. I'm a very large person, and so when I am like waving down strangers and trying to pass flyers, I make sure that I do it from further away because if I do it right up close to them, they are scared and they don't tend to like that. Then chapter four is like, okay, now that you understand how you're making connections, how to like kind of bond with folks, like, hey, make the connection with the churches about street safety on Sundays, things like that. Chapter four focuses on how to work with others, both within your group, within your like building that group, how to train volunteers, how to get people to volunteer. So it's not just you doing a million things, how to get people into leadership, as well as how to navigate the fact that inherently in advocacy work, the act of bringing people into leadership or recognizing that other people can take lead means they're going to do stuff differently than you. And some people have a hard time accepting that fact that you say, I'm perfectly happy with others taking leadership in a campaign as long as they do exactly what I tell them to do, when I tell them to do, and how I tell them to do it. It's like, yeah, that's not leadership then. That's automatons. So chapter four talks about that as well as how to navigate tensions within a group because different people have different opinions about all sorts of things. So sometimes people in your group might say something good about a bus and something bad about a bike, and some other people in the group might not like that. And it's like, well, what do we do? Then chapter five expands from there onto coalitions because we're not the only people operating in our communities. There are disability justice groups, racial justice groups, economic justice groups, business associations, businesses who are separate from the association that would never join the association. There's environmental groups, there's anti-tax groups, there's all sorts of groups. How do we work with them? How do we work together? How do we find them? How do we bring them in? What do we do? Chapter five talks all about coalitions and more, and very importantly, like why that matters. Um, in terms of coalitions, I like to think bus people want more bus funding is not exactly a headline. I once worked in a coalition with a local Catholic church about street safety funding in Oakland. And I was talking to some people about it, and they said, why is the Catholic Church weighing in on street safety? It's like, well, the Catholics don't like it when people get hit by cars. My friend was like, "Oh, do the Protestants also not like it?" It's like, no, no, we just didn't respond to the email. It's not like I'm not trying to cause a schism here, but like we have a lot of friends. And someone was like, yeah, I never thought that the Catholic Church would care about traffic violence. It's like, did you ask them? Step one, ask them. Um, and so chapter 5 talks about that. 6 and then works on once you're starting working with other people, one thing that comes up is people have different levels of access to government. So as you know, was talking about before, like, hey, we were talking to the mayor and we had this conversation. Some people in the Zoom might be like, geez, that's wild that you could just talk to a mayor. It's like you have a phone number for that person. And maybe some people in this room don't like the mayor, don't want to talk to them. And maybe that feeling is mutual with the mayor, and that's fine. Chapter 6 talks about how we can do kind of what's called the inside outside game, where how do those who have inside access to the decision-making halls of power, how do they use that in conjunction with those of us who are outside of the big fancy building? And how can we collaborate in a way that is productive? While also the chapter talks about here's all the ways that can become unproductive. That is a, it's an odd couple relationship which has just inherent tensions baked into it. And so chapter 6 talks about how to kind of understand those tensions, how to work around those tensions. I do a lot of inside outside game advocacy. So, and doing projects literally this morning. I'm being recorded. Never mind. I won't tell that anecdote. So, a lot's going on. So chapter 6 is about that. Chapter 7 focuses on tactics. Like, okay, great. You have all these plans. You have all this stuff. What are you actually going to do though? Like, this is great to say, okay, cool. So the church is on board and I got those things and the deli wants the bus lane. What are we actually doing? So chapter 7 talks about that, as well as walks through a bunch of different examples of pretty well trodden tactics and like walks through how to do them properly. So uh, a lot of people here have probably signed a petition. My guess is many of you may have even written a petition. It is not the hardest bit of creative writing in the world. It is fairly formulaic, but knowing how to write that formula is makes your life easier. And then chapter 7 also talks about one of my favorite parts of like tension in the advocacy world is when people are saying, well, our group should do this. People say, no, we shouldn't do that. We should do this other tactic. And the big argument of that tactics is confusing for folks is all tactics work. All tactics produce some result. The question is, does it produce the result you want? Does it produce just the results you want, or does it produce some other things? Like, hey, we want to get front page news, and we want our mayor to think more about traffic violence. That's why we're going to fill balloons with red paint and throw them at the mayor, get their attention, say, hey, the blood's on your hands. Like that definitely will work at getting attention. Like you will 100% get attention if you do that. You will also get other things. And so the question is not, like, so how do we evaluate like what we are trying to do? Um, in that sort of way. And then 7 is there's that 7 tactics, and then the conclusion talks about how to move this beyond just a single campaign, how to kind of live a life of advocacy, how to deal with burnout, how to hopefully prevent and avoid it in the first place. And yeah, pretty quick read, 200 pages, and so I'm so thrilled to talk about it with you all and take whatever questions folks have.
Thank you, Carter. And I forgot to say it at the beginning, but definitely you can either raise your hand, use the chat. This is an open conversation forum for learning and trying to understand things that we might be thinking about working on or we're currently working on. And I guess I'll start with a kind of a reflection that I really appreciated how current your book. I'm glad I read your book in 2020, early 2026, late 2025, because it was a hard year. Like it was a very hard year where we felt like times had been kind of moving in our favor for a while. There was increasing investments and announcements. And then all of a sudden there's all these headwinds and we're not playing offense anymore. We're playing a lot of defense and we're being very reactive. So I guess I would love to hear your thoughts on like how we, how you're getting through that, how some of your colleagues are getting through that. And, what do we do in the face of these transportation issues kind of becoming another front on the culture war? Like bikes are, evil and road diets are evil and we can't harm cars and bus riders are just those other people, not us.
Yeah, I mean, transportation issues have always been part of the culture war. You know, white man highways were white man's road through black man's home. There's protest signs, things like that. Since the creation of highways, the concept of jaywalking was invented in the early 1900s. Like railroad barons, like a lot of the anti-monopoly laws we have were about like the evil railroad companies because they were so powerful. The railroads were so powerful. And so I think to one of your points, like one is like the historical perspective, or just even the long-term perspective, both in terms of the past and terms of the future, of that, yeah, there is an ebb and flow of uh, who's on top and who's not, and where are we making progress and where's their backlash. And the way that I like to think about this is, the way to security is through strength. The way saying, okay, well, how do we prevent a backlash? It's like, well, the backlash comes because you're overreaching and you don't solidify your gains. So the question is not saying, okay, well, maybe I can apologize my way to greatness. And if I just say, oh, gee, shucks, fellas, can I please have a little bit of a bike lane that like maybe one day they'll get me everything. Like that doesn't work. What you need is a lot of stuff. And so what we need to do is make sure it's celebrated and won and beloved. And so a big thing is, if you get that bike lane, if you get that street closure, if you get that whatever, make sure it is well used. Host the parties, do the festivals, do the ride along, do the taco tours, do the coffee bike rides, do the whatever. It like a great thing about transportation almost does not matter what the thing is, as long as they are using the space that you're trying to use, as long as they are making use of that. So if you ever get a plaza downtown closed or they tear down the freeway and now it's a park, like make sure there's the biggest music festival in the world at that park, like that kind of stuff. And I think to your question about kind of the wheels of fortune and kind of larger national backlash happening, a big part is, we need to organize. That sometimes we win things because we get some good elected officials in office and they make some changes and that like they go do a lot of work for us. But if we don't have the numbers on our side, if we are not organized, if we can't deploy a bunch of people in our neighborhood, then next election cycle, we might lose our friends in office. And then all of a sudden we have someone else in office who ran on the I hate speed bumps platform. And so, I think to the question, like a path to happiness is not necessarily not focusing on elected officials, but recognizing that elected officials are the fruit of the tree that we grow. That if we do this work, if Reconnect Rochester and everyone else does the work of like getting community members on board, building the email list, building the contact list, talking to all the coalition partners, getting there to be demand locally, like you're gonna get the elected officials that you want because you got the populace, you got the strength. You are not skating by on someone else's power. And one thing I just really want to highlight is, particularly in the transit space, a lot of times throughout history, one thing I've seen is how much transit rider advocacy on like the big scale stuff, on the like, is there a subway system? Yes, no, has been done hand in hand with large businesses, which is fine. But what that does mean is often we are using other people's power. Often in the transportation space, we are the junior partner. We are the rudder trying to steer a big ship. And one thing that means is we are extremely dependent on other people's success and winning them over. So the more that we can get all the bus riders, all the people on paratransit, all the people who ever cross the street, in our lists, on our things, and active on our issues, the more that we have our own power, and that means the more that we get to decide what we want or prioritize it. Because otherwise, if you're the junior partner, the senior partner might say, "Great, yeah, I like that bus thing, but what I really want is this totally other policy now." The sprawling thing. You're like, "Oh, well, we don't agree on that thing." And they're like, yeah, and I'm the one who has the money and the power and everything else and the connections. So, pat you on the head, send you along your way. And so, to kind of wrap up, because you got a gigantic question, to wrap up my point on this, like by recognizing that this is not inherently cyclical, it's cyclical because we make it cyclical, that we backlash to the backlash, that we organize and get strong, and that when we are winning, when we're doing the stuff, continuing to have that hunger, continuing to have that sense of, okay, how do we keep growing as organizations? How do we keep shifting the narrative? How do we keep winning the story is really essential to kind of continued victories.
Thanks. Other people's questions? It's like a graduate seminar, like very comfortable with silence. Yeah, Henrik.
So I know you were talking about the sort of inside-outside game of advocacy and how those things interplay. I'm curious, in your experience, uh, which of those sort of realms of work have been more effective? And do you find that they're more productive when they're in communication and pointed at the same thing, or when they're more compartmentalized?
Yeah. So by far they're more effective when they're working together. And I think of them as not necessarily two sides of another coin, but like um they're two different sets of tools. And so they're great at doing very different things. For example, Inside Game is very good at saying, "Hi, elected official, just letting you know, here's this like super random policy change, and if you change this one sentence, fire code. I love talking about fire code. Um, hey, the fire code in Oakland, for example, means that it's really hard to get a protected bike lane on a street if the street is a certain width because they need a fire truck to go through. But if we change that width by 1 foot, all of a sudden we can get like protected bike lanes on half of Oakland streets or like some huge number. And Inside Game is great at being this like surgeon of like saying, here's all the stuff we'd like to make this really incisive thing. And one thing that Inside Game's really not set up to do is when a politician says, "Okay, cool, good to know." Anyway, and then goes about their life. Like Inside Game is really great at saying like kind of acting as a staffer almost to as a certain level to elected officials of saying, "Hey, we wrote the policy. We know you want to do the thing. Here you go. Run for that. We'll help like connect and do all this stuff." And that's great if the elected official wants to do that. If they don't want to do it, they're like, well, shoot. They're like, here's a policy and here's a thing. And they're like, okay, cool. Thumbs up. Um, Outside game is what's really important for helping elected officials care about the stuff we want them to care about. And this is one of the most controversial things I'm going to say probably in this call. We'll see what happens. So elected officials are people too. It is a big shock to some people. They have a really hard time understanding that. And much like we all have only so many things we can do in a day, same thing goes with elected officials. And a lot of our issues are like definitely in their top 100 of things that they care about, maybe even in their top 20. They probably work on seven things in a day. Your mileage may vary on your elected official. A lot of our work on the outside is about saying, hey, just for example, and I know this might be, I don't, whatever. This might slightly undermine my like, credibility as like author of whatever. So my bus shelter recently got like this morning, the bus shelter at my bus stop got taken down. We last year we got there was 100 shelters in Oakland slated for removal. Last year we got that delayed by a year. This year we did not get delayed, so that that year is now up. Like and literally this morning, I had to wait at a different spot while watching someone demolish my bus shelter and had some feelings about that. And I emailed the mayor's office and uh they're like, "Oh yeah, we heard the agency's doing that and da 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 da." I respond to them like, "No, it's the city of Oakland that's doing that. Fun like that is your administration doing that. I'm glad to hear that you are now on the record saying that this is bad. Fun fact, you are the ones doing it, not the bus agency. They don't have jurisdiction." And so like inside game is like very helpful for that. But in this case, like the issue is, hey, the city is not allocating money toward this. And so outside game is the thing that you really need to say, hey, mayor, we actually do want you to put $1 million or $500,000 or 2 million, whatever the number is. Like you need to do this. We're going to put this in, we're going to make this uncomfortable for you. Inside game is very good at like kind of greasing the wheels, but outside game is the thing that you need to shove. And so combining those is really key so that you are pointing in the right direction, that there's a little bit of like making sure the escalation is happening appropriately, that you're not working at cross purposes, because sometimes, for example, if you might be aligned on one of these issues, but working for different, bigger all-time goals. So maybe your inside game's big goal is like, oh, we want the person to pass this giant policy. And the outside game's goal is, I want there to be a different person in this office. And it's like, well, you're going to have some trouble then collaborating. And so recognizing when is the time to work together closely as inside and outside, and when's the time to kind of have a respectful distance as you do your separate things, is really important.
Hey, thanks. I'll get Ginny on the Zoom, and then we'll go to Dave here in the room.
Thanks, Cody. Yeah, Carter. So the title of your book, if you want to win, you've got to fight. Like, I gotta tell you, like that, like the dopamine in my brain is like, I just love that. Like, I always want to fight,
Good.
but I don't think I don't know that that's the most strategic. From my colleagues might not necessarily agree that fighting is the way to win. So can you just sort of give a
Yeah.
definition of what you mean by fighting?
Yeah, let's talk about the F word. So yeah. So one, I picked this title in part because I want this moment. I like to have this moment, like, let's talk about this. Because I I work with a lot of trans advocates, and we're all nice people. At the end of the day, like, even the fightiest among us, even the most aggro among us, like, we want our communities to be safe and accessible and welcoming and nice and pleasant. Fundamentally, that's not. We are on the side of angels. Angels are on our side. And there's plenty of jerks in this world. There's plenty of people who don't want those things that we want, or they don't prioritize them or don't care. And we're not going to, if all it took was being right, we'd win the things we have because we are right. It is a tragedy when someone is hit by a car. These are all preventable things. This is well studied. We have all the information on our side. We don't need another report. Big asterisk to that statement. Um, and for some people, they're like, and so we can't just wish cast and have it done. And I like to think of it as a fight because there's so many strategies to win a fight. Part of one of the most important things in boxing is not getting hit and knowing when to not punch someone. That is a very key part in when you're boxing, is knowing when to not throw a punch. And some people's fights, like, for example, in the Bay Area, we just hosted Make a Friend on Transit Day. And I'm gonna just double check. I'm being recorded. I'm fine to say this in recording. One reason why we did it is because it was Make a Friend Day. It was February 11th. It's Make a Friend Day, so it's nice to do. The other part is, like, hosting Make a Friend on Transit Day and having people feel warm and fuzzy about transit is very helpful when we say, and would you like to fund transit and maybe increase your taxes a little bit to fund transit? Like, that is good to it. That is not, that's part of the fight. Like, part of the fight is, like, dressing up like a person dressed up in a giant chicken costume, and we passed out name tags to like 2,000 people or whatever it was, and like being a bit goofy, and like, that's that we didn't just do that for the sake of doing it. We did that for the sake of doing it to an end. And I think when I think of fight, like, there's a purpose that we don't. I guess some people like fighting just for the sake of fighting. Generally, you fight to win. Like that. There's a goal in it, and I think helping people recognize that it is it is conflict that we are choosing that is winnable. We choose it for the purpose of winning, and the other part is, in other advocacy spaces, we talk a lot about the struggle. Love me the struggle, big fan of the struggle. However, the struggle to me sort of implies, like, it's just the miasma of the universe makes this a struggle. And it's like, no, the reason that this is a fight is because you want a speed bump and someone else doesn't, and boom, you have a fight. Like, that's literally all it takes is there to be a fight. Like, there's conflict. And encourage people to consider, like, what tools they like to use, what ways that, like, they like to do it. And to the point about the fight, to your question, like, aggro is not necessarily, like, aggressiveness is not necessarily, or in tone is not necessarily part of the fight, or it doesn't have to be. Um, I, for example, very passive aggressive person, not a great direct conflict person. And a great thing about politics is, unlike in life, if your mayor says, I don't want to do that bike lane, you're like, well, I want that bike lane. You're in conflict. You don't need to yell at the mayor. You don't need to talk to them. You're like, we're in conflict. Cool. I'm going to go talk to 1,000 other people and say, hey, I would like it to be safer for kids to get to school or get to the park. Can you tell them you like that, right? You're not a sociopath. And they're like, yeah, of course. It's like, cool. Can you tell that person that you want that? And they're like, yeah, sure. Why? It's like, because they're in charge of that. I'm like, oh, cool. And then the person you just talked to said, hey, did you hear the mayor doesn't like it? It's like, wow, that's so weird. let's get more people to know this. And now all of a sudden we're getting a lot of people like that is what political fighting looks like. It's very passive aggressive in that certain way, and it takes work to do it. And there are definitely is a lot of space for those who are I guess aggressive aggressive. I don't know, like active aggressive. Sometimes it's good for people to have like the direct conflict, and I'm so glad for my allies who do that part because I'm not that person. And so I think you're right that like it's not, and I think the other part is in terms of the like on the communication spectrum where like war on cars is on the like, hey folks, here's what we're saying and that stuff, like as the War on Cars podcast and those great people, and the like strong towns message of like, hey, let's all get along. At the end of the day, my book is for people who like want to take action. I assume that someone who's like, I hate bike lanes is probably not going to pick up the book. Good. I don't want them to learn the lessons of this because you probably could apply it in the reverse. I just don't want that. So thank you for that question, Jenny.
I wanted to also say that I think fight for me sometimes it feels like persistence, because like the one time the one chance you have maybe to influence something, that's not actually your last chance.
Yeah.
You might be 3 months late. Like we talked about this the other day, Carter. Like you might be 3 months late on something, but in reality, you're actually 9 months early.
Yeah.
You'll have a chance to do it again. There's an annual cycle to a lot of these things. So like being persistent and coming up with it, you might have the great idea, but it's 5 years too early, and you
Yeah.
just got to come back to it and get back to it. And then the other
Well,
like part of fighting that I think of was we were just talking to somebody on city council. He said, I'm fighting something right now. I'm fighting it, but I'm losing the fight. But
mhm.
I think even though I'm losing the fight, I'm going to win the war. So it's like
Yeah.
part of a bigger thing that he's trying to do.
Yeah.
And so we're all fighting different stages, I guess.
Yeah. And fighting is also some of it's easy. Like sometimes you win an easy thing and sometimes it's really hard. And like I think yeah, so that's a very malleable word that I like. So yeah, I there's a lot more I could say about it, and I will skip the rest of the part. But yeah, but thank you. I do like
Dave
that
has a
question.
question here in the room.
Hmm.
Oh, well, thank you for hosting this. I don't know how much you know about Rochester, so I have three questions for you.
Sure.
First one is, how much do you know about Rochester, Monroe County, New York State? How much time have you been here?
Yeah.
And then the last question is, I just bought your book. So okay if
Thank
I
you.
can go to the library?
Yeah.
Read
However your library wants to do it, that's great by me. Thank you so much. So the first part is, so I've actually talked with Reconnect Rochester. Cody, we've known each other now, I think 2-ish years. I've done work with folks in Rome, New York, and Syracuse. I spent a very brief part of the winter in Binghamton in January a couple of years back. I will say a week in Binghamton in the middle of January was sufficient for my little California self. But yeah, so in terms of like time there, haven't exactly walked every street, eaten at every coffee shop, things like that. Familiar with the big highway fight though. That's like definitely some Rochester in the news type stuff.
Oh, okay. Yeah, this reason that I'm here is right here.
Okay.
That's around the Great Bay Outlet.
Right.
So
Yeah.
there's a bridge across there that works for cars in the winter, five
Hmm.
months a year, 7 months a year. It's a bridge to nowhere. And I'm looking for a pedestrian bridge to be put there. It's less than 200 feet long. It seems to me to be a no-brainer. But then again, I just don't understand a lot of,
Yeah.
decision-making processes.
Well, and this is one of my favorite parts about some infrastructure projects, especially when it's like kind of it sounds like it's a smaller one that you're talking about. And like, you're not talking the Gowanus Canal Bridge, like you're not talking a new GWB or something like that, is really it's about showing that there is local demand, showing that there is not just local demand, but if there is like, oh, and outsiders would use it, or there's the great like Erie Canal bike ride thing. I don't know if that comes remotely near you all, but like, hey, this would be used, helping that. And then getting on the state level, because at the end of the day, like your mayor or city council member probably is not going to be able to cough up the money for this. Like you need them to support this so that the state recognizes that if they set aside money for your project, that the mayor wouldn't say, thank you for this money. I'm going to do something else with it. I'm going to go get ice cream. Um, And so chapter two, I think for you in particular, you're going to like because it's a lot of like, how do you daisy chain, how do you create political support and daisy chain it in a way and pin it on the right person? Because uh, at the end of the day, some of these things are like pretty cheap. Like it's easier, at a certain level, it's easier to get an expensive thing for like, how do I say this appropriately? Um, so a city might not put $100 million like that relative to their budget. That's just not going to work. To a county, they're like, okay, well, that's like slightly more doable. On a state level, like, okay, fine. And so part of it saying maybe your bridge isn't going to get like there might be in the state of New York a funding program for pedestrian access into rural communities or small towns and things like that. But technically, a bridge doesn't qualify because a bridge would eat up, bridges are expensive, like that would eat up the entire budget for the whole program. And so maybe what needs to happen is your state assembly member or state legislator needs to help create a secondary program that's just for bridges and overpass that's like really kind of with maybe even an eye for like, hey, there's the Erie Canal, there's a million rivers throughout upstate New York. This is the bridge our communities, parentheses, not downstate. We love you, New York City, but not on this one. We need like we're talking like cheap, small, easier bridges type of thing. And like helping kind of do this inside thing of like, well, what is the pathway? At the same time, what is the pathway to getting the money, getting the approval? At the same time, building local demand, getting people on board. And I think one thing, just because you have the hat shows that to me that you are serious about this and doing the work and probably talk to a lot of people. Anytime someone says they support it, get their information and like get them to sign like the petition or the coalition letter. Like you don't just to name, Maureen here or Mary, like if they said, "Oh yeah, that sounds good, go for it, do it." Like knowing that a lot of people support it isn't very, I mean, kind of useful, but what you need is something that you can demonstrate to others. That you could say, "Hi, Mayor, here's the 1,000 people who said, hey, nice hat, I like this. I got their names. Here's their zip code to prove that they're from Rochester. They're not just some schmo from New York, from Oakland or whatever. Um, do you also support this? Are you on the side of these 1,000 people, or are you against us, where no one for the no organized opposition?" And then then the mayor joins up, and then you get to like build your way up and up and up from there. So if you think of it as like you're building a tower of support. So yeah, chapter two you're gonna probably really like, and then five, I think for you particularly, and six. Thank you.
Dave's comments about the bridges makes me realize that we didn't cover that in our advocacy toolkit. We talk about all the different kinds of road projects, but not the bridge projects because they are different. Andreas on the Zoom has his hand up.
Hi, thanks for having me. I'm the schmo from California too. I'm
Hey,
residing in Venice, and I sort of recently joined the Neighborhood Council Transportation Committee. We're trying to get a survey out for better bike infrastructure within Venice.
nice.
And one argument that we hear, we have a few uh, on main streets, disconnected bike lanes, I call them.
Yep.
And the argument we often hear is nobody's using them.
Yep.
And how do you counter this effectively? And full disclosure, your book was on my radar, but I haven't gotten around to read it yet. I just came off
There you go.
Life
Well,
After Cars.
oh, nice. Well, you can get the book from Island Press, 20% off or 30% off with discount code webinar. If you're in Rochester, you can pick it up there. But yeah, to your question, one of the big things is twofold, and we talked about this in chapter two of so one, prove that you're right. So one part is host bike rides. Say like if people say, "Oh, no one's using it," like yes, there's the whole argument about saying it's a disconnected network and that's bad, and so that's therefore people aren't using it. However, if you can say, no, look at all these people using it, if we're getting people like show people struggling to use it, get people doing that. That could be a bike ride, that could be a let's get coffee, tour to coffee to Venice or whatever, or let's get tiramisu in Venice, or lean into the Italy thing, gondolas. Like just helping make that possible. The other part is not just helping people do it casually, but as like very obviously do it, and like do it in not just a fun way. There's some fun events, but like doing it politically. One thing that I think it was in Seattle, some bus advocates did was they did a slow walk bus race where there's a bus that they're trying to get a bus lane for, and people could just walk faster than the bus. And they had to like slow walk, like race the bus. And there's like a kid in a tricycle that like beat the bus or something like that. And just something where you're like, we are going to show how bad this is really important. In the chapter 7 of the book, I mentioned the Beautiful Trouble. There's like it's sort of like an encyclopedia of advocacy stuff with a bit of a focus on like the global south, which is great. But a big principle they talk about is like make the invisible visible. So part of that is saying to folks, here's this problem, here's how it goes, or um, like there's a lot of like malicious compliance potential of my favorite one is the slow bike ride, where people say, okay, you want us to stop at every stop sign? We're going to get 100 people together. We're going to go on bike ride and we're going to stop at every stop sign and we're going to make you go insane and realize that this doesn't work for us. Um, and so like whether you do a glow ride to show people at night dressed up or a costume ride or a fancy ride or a naked ride or any of these things to be like, hi, we're making sure that you see that there are people biking because that's just a key part of this. The other part is showing um, is getting people, as I mentioned about the bridge thing, like getting people support at all sorts of other parts. Because an issue, an issue that we have to deal with about bike lanes is they move people very quickly. And so, unless you are sitting there counting and really noticing, you will not notice, oh wow, 20 people just moved by on a bike. You'll be like, oh no, I was looking at my phone. I see no one's here. It's like, no, that's your failure at object permanence. That's not the bike lane's fault. Um, and so when you're doing a survey like this that you're talking about, making sure you have it on something that's very easy to pass out to anyone you see on a bike. Because generally speaking, people who are haters are very vocal, and people who are our side are not very vocal. And governments typically look for excuses to not do stuff because doing stuff is expensive. Even if it's monstrous and terrible and leads to people dying, it's still expensive and hard to do things. And so we need to make, we need to be twice as loud to get half as much. And so making sure that we are putting the QR code scan, the survey in people's hands and saying, hey, the city's doing this. Because being recorded. Okay. Sorry, I just have to like I have to make an anonymous various anecdotes on the fly. So, for example, the other day I talked to a city staffer who's like a true believer in this like small town in the Bay Area, and they're a true believer in bike stuff. And they said in our call, they live in a small town. They're like, look, we get a ton of hate every time we propose a bike thing. And they're like, I want bike stuff, but I get a ton of hate, and I literally never hear from supporters. And I said, okay, great. When you say literally never hear from supporters, do you mean like you only get a few? They're like, no, I literally do not have a single email in my inbox that says, thank you so much for this proposal. I support this fully. Please do this. Please do this faster. She's like, I literally never hear. I was like, oh wow, that is good to know that like we need to tell people what we want. And I said, and when you say you're flooded with hate, she's like, there are these 4 people and they always email us, and we're in a small town, and they're so right now it's 4-0. Like she's like, that's how we see the vote about this issue. And so really excessively doing the work of making sure that our side is notable, is speaking out in halls of power in the community, is a big part. And this to the kind of earlier question I appreciate about the inside outside. If you just do it where the mayor hears this message, but the public doesn't, what happens is the mayor's going to do it. And then the public's going to be like, what the hell? Why'd you just do this whole thing? And so you need to be very visible in both parts. So, yeah. Oh, race delay. Thank you, John, for pulling that out. That's exactly the thing I was thinking of.
Yeah, thanks. Yeah, I liked your comment about object permanence because I was thinking about object permanence with road diet that we recently implemented by our major medical center on Elmwood Avenue in Brighton. I think a lot of people who complain vocally about the traffic that has resulted from that road diet, they tend to travel the corridor at the same time every day from 7:55 to 8:02. And then they don't see the street when it's 8:10 or 8:12.
Yeah.
Literally 10 minutes later, it's empty. There's nobody
Yeah.
there. So they'll have a couple, like maybe one or two peak times where it's a little bit busier than they were used to before, but overall it's a lot calmer and safer and more welcoming for everyone. But they just don't see those. They're only traveling at the peak periods of time.
Well, and
So
this also goes to the point of telling people it's like, hey, and if you got 10 more minutes of sleep, you'd actually have a much easier commute. And if you could just stay 10 minutes, if you could just shift your clock 10 minutes later, you'd have an easier time. And this also goes into the traffic violence world of, a lot of, we need to make it very clear to people that road design is the is what's happening. And that's, that if you, when you look at a map of where the traffic fatalities and traffic collisions are in your community, you will see that that is not a random map. That is a map where the roads are the widest, where freeways are feeding onto, and all that kind of thing. And publicizing that map, helping people understand this, helps people understand this is not random, this is not accidental. There's no such thing as an accident. And that is part of the making the invisible visible, is part of the like, oh, well, there was that crash last year, and I guess, oh yeah, the year before there was that, and the year before that, and saying like, yeah, this is happening. This is, bringing the past into the present, saying, look, over the last 20 years, there's been 20 fatalities in this, area or this neck of the woods or whatever on this street, and helping people see like uh the body count in a sense. And then when the safety is done, saying like, in my community in Oakland, there was a very, very dangerous street, and then there was a road dial, and then there's not been a single fatality there since. And so part of the work is saying, hey, folks, like Telegraph Avenue is safe, and had that project not been done, people would have been dead by now. We are saving like we are avoiding collisions in the first place, and that's important to do it. So when you do win the thing, kind of reminding people, it's like, hey, we were at the rate of 3 crashes a week or a month or a year, whatever the thing is. And by now, if this project hadn't been done, we could have statistically expected X amount of thing. Like this is how many collisions avoided. So continuing to tell that story until to the point about backlash, like until the project has been so accepted into the community that any concept of pushing back on it or undoing it would be met as, that would be viewed as a radical thing.
yeah,
I guess in that line of thinking, something that's come up as a question for me when I think about doing transit advocacy is like, how do you deal with an organized opposition? How do you counter someone who has the levers of power, and how do you counter an organized effort against change and against the things that you want? Because that's always going to be on some level a fight you have to have, like when you're doing something as radical as like shifting from a very car-centric place to a very like from a very car-centric place to a very different place.
Yeah. And I think to the question about organized opposition, there's a handful of things I want to talk about. One is that our opposition is far less organized than we think. Um, there is not a disconnect Rochester happening right now. Like that at the end of the day, yes, organized opposition does pop up, and it's a whole thing, and we'll talk about that in a second. But for the vast majority of changes that you're seeking, there is just disorganized, like vaguely vibes-based opposition, or just in like, no one's saying, hey, there shouldn't be a bridge at that spot. Or there's not saying anti-bridge or bridge never crowd. Eventually that might pop up, but recognizing that we have kind of first mover advantage in that, which before going into the organized opposition means like, so we need to take advantage of that, which is like win a lot of friends, map out this, move faster, and kind of have tempo on our side. Because we often get to be the people to first introduce the concept to the people we're talking to. And so when we give them the frame, when we help them understand, hey, we're not like, who likes a road diet? Diets are terrible. You want me to go on a diet? What's that? You're like, hey, we want kids to not be killed here. this is a dangerous road, and we're gonna have this meeting. We're gonna help you understand that. Like helping people understand that and giving them our language is like such a big advantage because when someone eventually says, "Oh, well, that's expensive or whatever," like th they are trying to teach someone a new thing that we've already given them the language for. So one big part is that we get to do that. The other thing is, generally speaking, about an organized opposition, is they already have everything they want. Like they've already won. Like that's generally speaking what's happening. We are trying to get the new thing going on. And so generally speaking, there's a couple of asterisks to this one. Like, okay, maybe they win and they stopped the bike lane from going. Guess what? You can just try again. Like you can wear them down and maybe they'll eventually solidify in that stuff. But like that's that part. The other part, like so kind of recognizing that we're on the offense is a big part. Another part is recognizing that the organized opposition that does come up tends to want one thing, and we tend to want lots of things, which does mean that we have a lot of pathways to moving our energy and our power against them, through them, around them. And that the hey, we don't want the bridge there crowd is not going to stop you from getting the bike lane nearby. You know, that we can kind of help win a bunch of other things that line up and like create pent-up demand because they're generally just saying, no, we really don't want. I really like my parking spot. Couldn't care less about the parking spots 5 blocks over type of thing. And so using that to our advantage of like, okay, well, we'll pick up wins and we'll have as was coming up, like maybe, yeah, that means we have as Andrea said, we have a disconnected bike network. Okay, but now we have a disconnected bike network, and now it becomes more and more pressure. And the closer we get to a full network, the more people we get, the more pressure that gets on it to connecting it. And so we are the storm, bashing against their walls. And then the other part is recognizing that they're not monolithic. That at the end of the day, much like our power comes from working with groups and individuals and coalitions, like same with them. And so split off some of their members, and some of their members might split off, or some of those members might join you before they would be approached by them. So like out organized, just like, oh, why did the Catholic Church join this side versus the other side? It's like, well, we reached out first and we reached out 5 times. And they eventually, then the opposition never really thought to reach out to them. Like reaching out to everybody. I really strongly recommend doing that, like mapping out your community as much as you can. Um, because getting those people on your side. The other part is like chipping away at that. That at the end of the day, you can say, okay, well, they right now they have the Merchants Association on board, but what if I get this coffee shop that's maybe a member, but I can get them on my side, and I get this other one. And now when they say, well, the business community is on my side, you say, well, no, we have 10 businesses on ours. The business community is split on this. Like you get to fracture their power, which I think talk about more in chapter 5 specifically. And yeah, chapter 5 talks about it. And then lastly, being recorded, so I'll say this in a nice way. Be the second biggest jerk. That we are on the side of good. The angels are on our side. We want happy children and families connected and things like that. Make that very clear. There's a lot of people who's like, look, I don't really care about any of this stuff anyway, but these Reach Connect Rochester people seem like delightful nerds hosting ice cream socials and passing out balloons to kids saying this should be more parks and oh, wouldn't that be nice? And then the other people are just like guys in F-350s rolling coal and screaming at children. I know whose side I want to be on. Like I know who I think should win and that kind of stuff. Like I know who I'd like if I'm an elected official. I know whose photo op I want to be in. And so we get to be cutesy and fun and do all that kind of stuff. And that there's a little bit of a fight that takes that. Like, that ice cream and puppy dogs aren't going to pass out itself themselves. But like a funny thing about our opposition is people being recorded, they often don't win do themselves any favors in their responsiveness. And that helps us in the sense like it would be harder if they had better message discipline and didn't seem like sociopaths when they said like I couldn't care less about that dead kid. Like, that's like really wild that that is their statement. And I, as a political consultant, if I was ever hired by those people, would be like, hey, maybe hold on that sentence. Uh, we're on team, we care about our neighbors. And so the more that we loudly and proudly do that and show that to be true, like you can't just say, I care about street safety and I couldn't care less if a neighbor was killed in a different way. Like, we have to say, no, we're really about this. And if the opposition's like, wow, it's that or a parking spot, like, okay, I can kind of see that I'm on side, you know, kumbaya and puppies and children, everything like that. Kittens are nice too. Sorry for all that.
I was very pro dog, Carter.
I know.
The questions generated in the room or online? If not, I can jump in with, I think this goes to like the question of activating, people, like, let's just say bicyclists, who want more bike lanes, and are, maybe like, they're a little bit like, all or nothing, they're like,
Hmm.
it's not a fully protected bike lane with lasers that shoot the cars, then we are not going to ride in it. So I think sometimes, as the people who get paid to do this all day, we sit around thinking like, how do we make sure people are equipped with like the realistic arguments and, making sure that they can be effective advocates. And so I think it's a little bit of a two-part question, like, is that, what are your best thoughts on activating people to be, to actually learn the tools to be effective advocates? And B, like, does it even matter? Like, or, is that kind of our job to be the reasonable people and like just let everybody else ask for laser activated protected bike lanes?
Yeah, I mean, it's great when you're on the inside and there's more radical people who want to do more radical stuff and, paint the bike lanes themselves, install the concrete barrier themselves, and like encouraging them to do it is good. Like that makes you seem like normal fuddy-duddies and I'm just trying to make everyone happy. If I'm the elected official and I want to make both sides happy, I see that what you're asking me for is the normal thing. And so that's great to have a radical faction. Like that's a wonderful thing. I think explicitly working with them in chapter 6, like recognizing you're the inside people and maybe, yeah, give them a copy of the book and being like, I'm not telling you to buy a tie. I'm not telling you to cool it. I'm telling you that there's certain times where this is very helpful and certain times where it'd be helpful if you did a different type of thing. Um, and because a fun thing about advocacy is no one's in charge of it. Like, let's say you say, and I and all the power invested in me as the grand booba of Reconnect Rochester tell you don't. They'll say, cool, I'm going to keep doing it. Like, you just, like, one thing I think is like really cool about advocacy is it's literally all based on consent. Like there's very little coercive power that we have over each other in the advocacy space. If someone's like, I'm not going to pass out this flyer, you can't be like, well, you're not getting paid. They're like, fun fact, they already weren't getting paid. You're like, well, I'm not giving you coffee. It's like, I was going to get my own coffee anyway. Like, we just really don't have the ability to tell someone, like, hey, stop doing that. We can, they're just going to ignore us. Um, and so with that understanding, that becomes a lot more easier to say, hey, look, we have the same goals. Ultimately, we have different pathways to achieving those goals. How do we collaborate? How do we not? And being just very open about that. Like I being recorded. Okay. So this other anecdote, as you may notice, I don't like come up with like, here's the 12 anecdotes I'm going to tell. Like as the stories come up, I'm like, oh, here's the thing. So that's why I always have to in a knives thing. But like, for example, a transit agency themselves can't really say, hey, governor, give us the money or we're dying. Like, or they can say that. There's a lot of stuff that a transit agency can or can't say in a public sphere that we can say as individuals. And so it is very nice to have the people who can say the thing, to have like, there might be a time where you as Reconnect Rochester say, yep, we love this buffered painted bike lane and this is really great. And you know that there's just members of your group who are just dying on the inside because they're like, there's absolutely nothing about paint that's going to save us. And you being clear with them privately, it's like, yeah, I recognize that this is not the full victory that we want. In 3 years, we're going to get this better. And in the meantime, if you feel like getting some concrete or some flex posts, which you can get online at stoppainting.com or whatever, like go put up some flex posts, like good. I think helping people understand what is the lane that you can do, where you can help, and helping people understand that there's the stuff we do in public and the stuff we do in private, and that those aren't always the same thing. And that's fine. That's the case for everyone in the world. That's not, that is part and parcel of it all. And so helping people, like making those actual connections so people know you personally, and they might decide, okay, I don't like you personally. You're like, okay, well, that sucks. But helping folks understand that you are pushing as hard as you can for what you can do, that they have a role to play in creating more possibility for you, and encouraging them to do the stuff that they have the freedom to do, I think is really key, while also being transparent for them. It's like, hey, look, sometimes I'm going to have to just smile and shake hands with the person who I do not like and give them the photo op because they did give me half of a victory, and we're going to give them the photo op. Don't worry, we're not donating $1,000. Like, we're not going to be campaigning for them, but yes, they do get that photo. So, um, yeah, there's a lot to that.
Yeah, that's helpful. All right, Terry.
I don't really have a question. I just want to say a couple of things that you said it really hit me. One is that, I mean, I did a lot of disability advocacy. I have a child with a disability, and I did that for a long time. And one of the reasons I was often on coalitions is because I'm like, once people knew I was willing to be an advocate and do systems type advocacy, I was on a lot of coalitions, particularly because I did not work for any of the agencies. So I didn't endanger anybody's grant money. I'd be the one in the thing going, wait, what? Wait, what? And that worked very well for people. On the other hand, I was never outsized radical, but there are people in Rochester that were. And there were a couple times when we partnered with them, and I would be at the meeting going, okay, I can do that. And they're like, you got it. And it was very effective. The other thing I thought was really interesting that I've never heard anybody say was about solidifying your gains. And that's amazing to me. I really appreciate that perspective.
Thank you. Well, and I appreciate that. And I think, in terms of the disability justice world, which is so vital, both in its own right and because, as a reminder, there's only two types of people in the world: those who are currently disabled and those who could be at any moment of any time. You could walk out of this building and slip and become a member of that community. So you have both. Everyone has I think everyone should have a very strong interest in disability justice, even just selfishly so. And I think to that point, that one of the things that you said that I want to also pull out more is, once you start doing this a bit more, all of a sudden you become invited to a lot of spaces. At the end of the day, there's a ton of work to do, not a ton of people who feel like doing that work all the time. And so it is shockingly not that hard to build up an expertise in a very niche thing that like will just come up over and over again. And so, becoming the person who can talk about people on mobility scooters getting on bus service in the winter in the upstate New York area. Like, that is going to get a person invited to a lot of different committee meetings where people say, okay, so this bus kneels to this level, or how is this curb looking, and all that kind of stuff. Like, so one, if you are a person who's not currently in any conversation like that and you find that appealing, you'll get there just by doing this work. And the other part is, that's why it's so essential to keep organizing and keep training more people and keep bringing more people in, because there's how shall we say, there's a you could spend your entire life in committee meetings. You could spend your entire life in community group focus meetings, groups like that. Like, there's a lot of process. You could get lost in your process. And this isn't to say the process isn't worth doing. It is just to recognize that there is feels like infinite process. Just for example, the 9 county region where my group is, there's 27 transit agencies. Each has a board. So each has like a monthly board meeting or something. And there's at least like 3 subcommittees on that. And that is already more mental math than I feel like doing. And that is and none of those are 30 minutes. Like, and all those are a lot longer, and they have agendas and the whole thing. And so, one thing I think to the point of like inside outside advocacy, as we talked about, is outside advocacy is really good at getting something on the agenda and just pushing stuff through. And inside advocacy is really good at um like almost that day-to-day stuff of like one example I'm thinking about is benches at bus stops. You know, that is a big deal to have benches at bus stops. And where that bench is installed really matters, especially from a people on a sidewalk passing through, even if there's a sidewalk. And so having folks advocate and doing the work and getting the information is key. And I think to kind of bring this point home to your thing about the commissions, as you're saying, like since you're as you said, you're like, I'm part of this community. I'm the one happy to do the systems work, and now I get invited to all these rooms. Like, uh, recognizing it's important to recognize that these committees are tools for your goal. The goal is not to be on the committee. The goal is to get the thing. And sometimes that means being on the committee. Sometimes that means getting someone else on the committee. Sometimes that means having eyes on the committee and only once every 6 months having 500 people call in and saying this thing and then just never being on that committee again. And so just very easy to get lost in committees. I'm a little excessively committee phobic, and so that is my big committee speech.
Well, I feel really happy we have one transit agency for our 9 county region. Any? Yeah, thanks. I think we're kind of starting to wind down. So any fun, yeah, questions?
Oh, sorry.
Go ahead.
I guess I've always been interested in getting involved, and I guess this is less of a question, more of a comment. It's very reassuring to hear that if I just keep at this, if I just keep showing up, if I just keep like looking for spaces to get involved, I will find work and I will find stuff to insert into, because that's something that I've been interested in doing for a bit now. But
Nice.
I've only really like started coming to Reconnect Rochester in the past like year or so. So yeah,
Yeah.
just a reassuring thing for me personally.
Yeah, and I'm so glad to hear that. And I think also the one extra layer I'd add to that is what you're already doing is like, and with the intention of learning. Because there's plenty of people who are like, I'll just keep showing up and I'm not going to learn a single thing, and then they keep doing the same thing. Uh, but if you show up and keep learning and like recognizing that advocacy is a craft is, I think, really essential to us getting better at it. That, when you see a board meeting happening, you're like, well, why did that vote fail or what happened? Like really like giving yourself that pleasure of like, being the John Madden NFL commentator being like, oh, okay, so this happened and this happened, like doing that, like just thinking about that a little bit, even passively. Like I find that so helpful because there's no inherent part of this process that says, hey, here's your feedback. Please incorporate this feedback. Here's a performance review, a performance improvement plan. Like that doesn't just inherently happen. But the good news is we have feedback constantly. Anytime you try to pass out a flyer and that didn't work, that's a moment to be like, huh, why didn't that? The person was on a bike. I tried to give them a bike thing. I said the word bike. Oh, I don't have a giant sign with me that says the word bike and they were going by fast. Like that work of like continuing to show up, continuing to learn, is great. And you will find that once you get a certain level of familiarity in the vocab and the stuff, it's very easy to get swept away into it because all of a sudden you're now the person in your neighborhood who knows the thing about the thing. And so next time someone has a question about that neighborhood, it comes to you. And then the next time, now you know two things about it. And so it's sort of like a pebble in a stream. All of a sudden, like everything starts to build up around it. And, I wasn't talk about this in the book. I was always a transit fan and a biker and, had the feelings around transportation that only a kid who grew up in the suburbs really can. And years ago, my assembly member was like, "Hey, folks, what are some ideas for bills?" And I suggested a thing about a bus only lane on the Bay Bridge. He said, "Good idea. Write the policy, and I'll think about introducing it." And it's like, well, that's a lot of work. that I have to do now, and I should tell the story in the book. But like, Trans Bay Coalition came out as part of that, and a lot of other projects happening at the time, and then things kept building and things kept building, and eventually I wrote this book, and eventually we're here. So you really don't know where your path is going to go as long as you keep doing it and keep working on getting a little bit better each time. So thank you.
And I actually thought of a real question while
Okay.
I answered. So I also happen to be a game designer, and I just noticed in your intro that you have a working company. What I was interested in is, do you think there's something there? Do you think there's like some sort of attraction as a
Oh,
game
totally.
designer you have to? Yeah, okay.
Yeah.
I was just curious because
Yeah. To not totally nerd out on this, and please get my email from Cody. We should talk. Politics is sorry. In the world of games, there's Monopoly and there's chess and there's all these things, but there's also a type of game called an engine builder, where it's like you start out with coal and then you make a thing to turn your coal into steel. Now your steel can become buildings and your buildings become points. Like that kind of mechanic is like a very common thing. And that's essentially what a lot of political organizing is. It is like, oh, okay, I have an idea. How do I get this idea into people? Okay, now we have 50 people who like this. How do I get these people to become more groups? Okay, I gotta get them packets so they could pass it out. Like it's very gamey in that sense of like, oh, we're building engines at the time. And one thing I think in particular to that point is there's um, in game design and in advocacy, there's a lot of how do we translate this concept into something that a person can easily understand? And the concept is itself pretty easy, but sometimes hard to put into words. So, for example, everyone who's ever held a playing card, if I say put the card into your hand, and like flip it showing up or draw three from the top of the deck. Like the fact that we know these cards and we know these terms or even what a playing card is, that's not a given. And so when we say things like, oh, paint doesn't protect for about bike lanes. People are like, well, what are you talking about? What would paint protect you from what? It's like, oh, it's the cars that are going to kill us. And in game design creation and in rules instruction or making, baking any of these things where you're like giving instruction, there's so many lessons to learn for advocates about saying, how do we make our point as easy for people to understand? How do we incorporate this into their lives while recognizing that like our shared vocabulary isn't as much as we might think. And yeah, I don't know, but yeah, happy to nerd out about games, and we should definitely talk separately about that too.
I think it's a great place to wrap it up. Carter, thanks so much for joining us tonight. So you got a few more hours in your day left, and everybody can buy the book on Island Press. If you're in the room, we still have some copies. I do want to do a couple shameless plugs before we wrap up and close the Zoom. One is the advocacy toolkit. Take a look at that and share it with your friends. We'll add bridges, Dave, and try to get some more details on that. And then ways. This is kind of our ways to get involved. We always say one of the best ways to get involved and advocate is just to get multimodal, use the bus, ride your bike. Try to carpool with people, just talk about it with your friends. I like that I think your Oregon friend is somewhere close to where I grew up in Oregon. So yeah, I want to be I always wanted to be the weird bike guy in my town. So be the weird bike guy or lady, and then sign up for Mobility Action Alerts. That's kind of our weekly, here's what you can do in small bites or somewhat bigger bites to continually drip the conversation on at what the world that we want to see. And if you feel like writing or sharing your story, you can write a blog post saying what you do and why it's special to you, what motivates you. And then I will just highlight a few other events that are coming up in April. We have an engagement breakfast, and a lot of you have been to those before. I think the thing I would ask is like tell a friend about it, especially if you've been to one already. Like just tell a friend. it's, as Carter says, growing the movement, more people that get involved from different angles, and maybe they're a business owner, or maybe they have a friend who runs Wegmans or something like that. They can be helpful in building the network out. And then Thursday, May 21st, the next community conversation, e-bike lash, the growing and largely uninformed backlash against e-bikes, and we want to have a real open conversation about that with people, kind of inform some of the policy that the state coalition on bikes is putting together, and be prepared for what's coming. And then I would just end with a plug for the annual rock and roll on Sunday, May 31st. It's our big fundraiser. It's at Rohrbach, starts and ends at Rohrbach. It's a fun bike ride. Short one is 8 miles, and then there's a longer 30-mile one for the real hardy ones, or the e-bikers. We end at Rohrbach with a nice party where we just eat, drink, and build community with everyone. So with that, I want to say thanks again to Carter, and everyone out there, have a great rest of your evening.
I guess
Thank you,
really
folks.
quick, I'll just add quickly, another thing that we haven't published yet, but is going to be announced soon. I'm going to be starting to do like a either monthly or bi-monthly Zoom calls, like an intro to advocacy, where we'll basically walk through our toolkit that we just published. And also want to emphasize that our toolkit is just one resource. Highly encourage you reading the book. But if you look at our toolkit, you're confused about anything, please don't hesitate to email me, and I can help get back to you and answer my question, pointing you to a different resource. And we want to be collaborative, so we're all working together as we move forward. Just wanted to.
That's an awesome offer. Take them up on it. Make them regret that offer.
Yeah. All right. Have a good evening. Thanks, everyone.
Bye, folks.